Welcome to the Codcast. I'm Bruce Moe of CommonWealth Magazine, and I'm joined by Tom O'Brien, one of the leading developers in the Boston area. He has a mega project in the works at the former site of Suffolk Downs in East Boston, and another at Bullfinch Crossing, the former site of the Government Center garage. Welcome, Tom. How are you doing?
I'm okay, Bruce. Thanks very much for having me.
Let's start by taking your temperature, so to speak. This can't be a good time to be a developer with a lot of big projects on the table, or so it would seem, given what we've been seeing in COVID. How are you feeling right now? How's your temperature?
My temperature's pretty moderate. I mean, I honestly, it's a very strange time. I mean, this is the strangest time I think I've ever experienced in my life, certainly in my adult life. But we are fortunate in that for the projects that we have, our capital providers, our investors, our partners are really strong institutional investors who believe in the projects and they believe in Boston. So there's no, no undue anxiety. There's no panic on our side, and everybody feels reasonably confident that as the society in general finds its way out of this pandemic, that Boston will once again find itself in the midst of a really good growth pattern, and that the United States will kind of find its way back onto a good growth pattern as well. So I think in general people feel okay. I am nervous. Obviously, it's very strange. I mean, I'll add one quick thought. As I think this through, whenever we've gone through very difficult recessions as a city, one of the things that we could always count on was that the institutions would build projects during recessions. So hospitals and colleges, for the most part, would build their projects, their capital projects during a recession. They'd build dormitories, they'd build new hospital buildings, they'd take advantage of low interest rates, take advantage of perhaps some leveling off or some reduction in construction costs, and they would build through that recession, which would offer employment for the construction trades, offer good projects, and would really be an interesting way to move infrastructure forward for the city. When you think about what's happened in this pandemic, uniquely so, the hospitals have really had a difficult time financially. I think they're doing better in the last 6 months or so, but in the beginning of this, they were really in tough shape. And then the colleges, face a model now where if you take a place like Harvard, which for 350 years through Civil War and World War and all the other crises that you can point to over the last 350 years, Harvard has always had, as far as I know, all four groups of students, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors on campus all the time, together with graduate students. And this year, for the first time, I think ever in the entirety of the history of Harvard, there's only freshmen on campus. None of the other students are invited back. And that's true across the board for all the different colleges. So it's a very strange time. It's hard to read what will happen next as we go through it.
There's also this, particularly for your business, this concern that as we've gone through COVID, a lot of businesses have had to adjust and start to work from home, work remotely. And I know you've heard this. A lot of, people that rent office space are saying, maybe we don't need as much space as we thought we once did. What are you hearing on that? And what are your thoughts?
We're hearing a mix of thoughts. I think for me, fundamentally, when I look at my gut and I say, well, what does it really feel like? I think we have gone through a fundamental change in which it is now more conceivable that people will work on in a more flexible manner. When earlier in my career, for example, if you had said to your boss, I'm going to work from home for a day, that was largely frowned on. That was not really considered a true workday. I think today, what's clear is, particularly for people with young families and the like, if there's a day or two that they want to work from home for a day and they can be productive from home, that flexibility is going to be important. But I think the workplace still serves as the place where there is team building, the place where there's the true exchange of ideas, the place where particularly young people are mentored, and where you create a sense of, kind of what the culture is of the organization. So I still think there will be a substantial number of people in the workplace. And I think, what will end up happening is it gets a little bit difficult to manage. So if you take a law firm, let's say, and let's say the law firm says to itself, okay, each of our lawyers will take probably one day and work from home. The challenge there is going to be, well, how do you set that up? Because each of those lawyers, even though they'll be one day at home, will probably still have their own office, I think, for the most part. There are some accounting firms that have gone into what we call a hoteling version of this, where a partner in an accounting firm doesn't necessarily have a specific office. They walk in on the day that they'll be in the office. They're assigned an office and then given a card or a code in which they plug into that office, and all of their phone calls go to that office, and that becomes their temporary office. I don't think that works across all professions like lawyering and more finance and things like that. So I do think that there will be a need for office. I'm not kind of part of the hand-wringing crowd to say, boy, there's going to be a drastic reduction in office. I do think that the way people work will change. That's for sure. It will be more flexible. But we still fundamentally need offices. We need cities, because those are the places where people gather. That's where they collaborate. That's where we produce good ideas. That's where we're able to converse with one another. That's, I think, still the future of cities and office.
So I want to agree with you on the big picture approach you take, but my gut sort of tells me that people also want to save money, I think, and they sort of say, "Hey, this has changed my attitude." I'm a perfect example of that. I didn't think I could work remotely effectively as a reporter at all, and it's very different what I'm doing now. But it is possible, as long as other people are sort of buying into the same philosophy. So the governor has he's streaming his remarks, and other people are getting on phone calls, and it's happening more and more.
Mm.
And I think this is true in a lot of businesses. And there's this financial savings that, hey, Boston is a really expensive place to have office space. So maybe we'll condense a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you in a big picture way that cities are important and going to the office is important. But I also sort of see that people are saying, well, maybe not as important as I thought, and I can save some money if I figure out a way around this.
Yeah, I do agree. I do agree that it is, and I was probably in the camp with you where I frowned on remote working, particularly for our organization. I really wanted everybody in the office because we felt that culture and how we operated and being good to one another and being kind to one another, being, in the space together, that team approach was essential to who we are. I would say, we've been completely remote, really, for the most part. I'm here in my office today, but every one of us has been completely remote since March 17th or so, and we've produced really great work. I mean, we have a group of 40 people in our team, and when I say remote, some people went home. There are people whose parents live in Connecticut or New Jersey or Ohio or whatever, and they spent some months, or Washington D.C. They spent some months with their parents, and so they were truly remote. And we've produced still great work. So I get that. I think a couple of things that we've begun to find, though. One of the things we do, for example, Bruce, is as we're designing new projects and we get to the interior spaces of those projects, then we conduct meetings in which we consider all kinds of different materials and furniture and pieces for the interior spaces of those projects. And typically what ends up happening is, in a big room, we assemble all that material and we make decisions based upon the themes of what we want the building to feel like. And so we've had a couple of those meetings in which some people have been physically present in the room to participate in that. And some people have elected to Zoom for that, maybe for health reasons or maybe for, whatever. What we found is the people who are on Zoom during a meeting when people are there present, it just doesn't work. You can't fully participate as a Zoom, person while people are in the room. So I think what's going to end up happening is those sorts of awkward situations are going to drive this kind of return to the office process. I think there may be true Zoom meetings that can be managed from home or from a remote spot. But fundamentally, if there will be in-person meetings, you're going to need to be there for an in-person meeting. It's Zooming for that is not going to work. And personal contact is going to matter. Personal conversations are going to matter, all those sorts of things. So I think there will be more flexibility offered to people to, participate from a Zoom perspective. But I really fundamentally believe that the most effective meetings are going to be meetings that are held in person with real people and real conversations.
Talk a little bit about, are you meeting with potential tenants and
We are.
people that are going through making this decision? And when you make your case to them, or what are they saying? And are you having to design these office spaces differently?
There's two aspects of that for us. One is, we've delivered a residential building in the midst of COVID. So we delivered what we think is the best residential building in Boston, the 100 Sudbury Street, which is here on our site. That's 368 apartment units with 55 condos on top. We realized early on that we needed to become a really great virtual organization in terms of showing those apartments virtually. So we've produced what we think is a really strong, cutting edge virtual presentation for folks, because we knew that people, couldn't just willy-nilly come and look at different apartments. They were certainly going to go through a process where they would winnow things down and then come up with a list of a small number, one or two apartments that they would actually go visit. And we wanted to be on that list. So we created a really strong virtual process for people to, see the apartment, to understand what it's all about, all those sorts of things. And that's been successful for us on the apartment. So we've leased, probably we're probably more or less on path with where we thought we would be in terms of leasing units in that building. And our condo sales process is starting to pick up a little bit now too. Again, same thing where you're not going to be able to lock in a condo buyer until they physically see the property, but spending a lot of time making them feel comfortable with it virtually has been a key focus for us. In terms of office tenants, same kind of thing. We've spent a lot of time trying to create a virtual presence and presentation for office tenants. So we have a very nice film. We have a very nice sense of what the building can look like. We can project all that out and spend a lot of time with people, helping them feel comfortable with that. So all of the tenant presentations that we've made have been presentations virtually. And we, again, have been very successful and have brought people along and actually have pretty good momentum on the leasing side as well for office.
What are they saying, though? Are they getting less space, or are they adopting your point of view that, we're going to be through this in a little while and we'll be back to normal?
It's a mix. So, half of our new office building will be occupied by State Street. So State Street is moving its executive team together with a group of finance-related people, traders, and the like, from One Lincoln, where they're currently located. They're moving that group to our building, and they'll be in our building beginning in 2023. We will complete that building by 2023. So when we talk to State Street, is very clear with us that they're taking up all of the space that they envisioned that they would take. Now, I think as a company too, they're very clear also that they've been able to manage the remote working environment very well for them as a company. And so that there can be some, additional flexibility. I do hear from State Street that on other spaces elsewhere in the country, they may need less space from that perspective. But at least for our building, with execs and finance people and all the rest of it, they're saying they need at least the same amount of space, maybe a little bit more. They have options to take more. In terms of the new tenants that we're considering right now, they still are going through a lot of decision making on how much space do they need. And it falls into two large categories. There are some companies still that are saying we actually might need more space because we have to have people more spread out than they had before. So while the watchword before might have been efficiency and grouping people close together, some of those companies now are saying, well, gee, we feel like we need to space people out a little bit more, which means we may need more space. The bigger piece, though, is most companies are kind of thinking about, okay, a law firm, for example, they're thinking about, okay, what is this really going to mean for us? What do we need for space? I think too, part of that is they're struggling trying to figure out what will happen in the economy. We had the beginnings of a very difficult recession. The recession clearly affected people who are at the lower third or so of the economic ladder, right? And those jobs that were filled by those folks that were retail jobs, hotel jobs, all those jobs, it's going to have a hard time those jobs coming back. And the question is, how is that going to work in our economy? What is that actually going to mean? Because it could mean a significant amount of underemployment as we go forward. But I think for most of the law firm types and the finance types and things like that, there's not been, as much of a, kind of pressure on jobs. It's a pretty heartbreaking thing to kind of watch and consider as we watch what's happening in the economy right now. So those companies, I don't think, are considering large layoffs. They're really trying to think about, okay, what's the most efficient use of our space? How many people are going to be in it at the same time? Maybe there might be some moderate amount of layoffs, but for the most part, they're trying to just consider how much space they're going to need as they go forward. I don't see them though saying that there's a drastic reduction. There could be some reduction, but not a drastic reduction, at least right now.
And the example you gave earlier of I think you used the example of an accounting firm or a law firm where person would come in and maybe not have an assigned office, but
yes,
sort of go to a space and plug in somehow, and then everything would sort of
come to them.
Is that an actual example that you're working on?
Oh yeah, that exists today. So PricewaterhouseCoopers probably was the lead company that thought about this in Boston, and they began that work probably 10 years ago or so, and they've continued with it. And there are other accounting firms that are like that. So accounting firms, I think, see themselves as unique in that regard because they spend a fair amount of time in the office, yes, but they spend a lot of time on site at clients' offices. And so I think accounting firms beginning 10 years ago began to assess their space and say, well, you work so hard to become a partner, and then you become a partner and you have this office and you want that office with windows and all the rest of it. The truth is that office sits empty for a long period of time. So is there a better way for us to configure our space? And so essentially what many accounting firms have done is they built out office space with different categories of offices. So there's a nicer office, let's say, that would be for a partner, but it's not dedicated necessarily to a specific partner. And then there are other offices that are dedicated to associates and other folks in the firm. And so a partner might be at the client's, headquarters for 2 days. And then on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, the partner comes in, goes to whoever is the front desk person and says, I'm going to be here. They get assigned an office. That office has a setup and a phone and computer setup that they just plug in, and that becomes their office. So all of their incoming calls come to that phone. All of their email, obviously email is a from anywhere place, but all of their email essentially gets grouped to that spot. They can host meetings there. That's their place, at least for that day. So accounting firms have really led the way on this, and it is a clear path that other companies can adopt as well.
So that seems good in theory to me, but as someone who often ends up throwing paper on the floor and piles of it lying around, that would mean you'd have to be very organized. And
yes, I'm similar to you. I'm a sort of like, I have my list. My list is always handwritten, and I'm adding to my list. So my list might be a 5-page list that I've kept over 4 or 5 years before I clean it out and pare it down and all the rest of it. So yeah, you're right. That goes on the floor. That goes. I like to know where that is. So it is a little foreign for me. I agree with you, but it has been very successful and it has worked. The other big thing that these firms had trouble overcoming was the sort of rite of passage for a person who became a partner in those firms was I work away in a cubicle and then suddenly I get my big corner office. But I would say the increase in overall profitability because they are apparently spending less on office space, at least less on a per person basis, that has overcome the objections of the senior partners who don't get their their one big corner office with all the pictures and all that kind of stuff. So it's a little odd, but it's worked well, I think. That's my understanding.
And the other option you mentioned where companies are thinking, well, maybe we need more space so people spread out.
Hmm.
The underlying sort of assumption there sort of sounds like even if COVID, quote unquote, goes away, something else will come along, or we have to prepare for something like this down the road. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little, there's a great quote. I'm not going to get it exactly right, but armies are always preparing to fight the last war, right? So, they're never quite prepared for whatever the next war is. And so, you're right. People are really affected by what's just happened. And so I think many companies are trying to figure out, okay, how do we plan for this? The key thing before, particularly among finance firms, was to be in a position where you could squeeze the amount of square footage per person, per employee, to a very, very low number. And that would essentially put employees on top of one another. They were thinking, obviously, we're saving money, by squeezing as many employees as we can into space, but also trying to create a collaborative atmosphere in which people would, get to know one another and work well with one another and things like that. Many of those firms are now recognizing, we're squeezing people well within 6 feet of one another, so we're not having appropriate social distancing. And the question becomes, okay, how real is another pandemic? I mean, it took from 1918 or 1919 to today to have a pandemic and that, affected us in the way that pandemic did. Is it another 100 years or so, or how will it play out? Who knows how it will play out. But there is that thinking though still of, perhaps we can't jam as many people into the space because we need people to be spaced out because that's not appropriate given the lessons of the pandemic. So there is some of that thinking.
And everything we've been talking about, there's a lot of uncertainty with the economy, what's going to happen with the coronavirus, what's going to happen with politics, what's going to happen with everything. It's very up in the air. So this has to be a sort of nervous time for someone like yourself with all sorts of big projects sort of moving along, and you don't really know what things are going to happen, a month from now, let alone 6 months from now.
I mean, things are uncertain all the time for all of us, right? I mean, it's part of what the way the world works. We sit here today on Friday morning, and yesterday afternoon, the news in our world was that Mayor Walsh is going to be appointed to Secretary of Transportation in Washington, D.C. We'll have a new mayor. The city council president, Council President Janey, will take over. Then there'll be an election. So there's change all the time in our world. It's part of what makes our job interesting. Things are always changing. I think the thing I've learned over time, this is probably my third or fourth recession. I think I've been doing this. I'm 57 years old, so I've been doing this for a little bit. The thing I think I've learned every time is, no matter how we get into the recession, no matter where we go, at the end of the day, Boston still ends up being a place that lands well within the overall world economy and becomes a relatively popular place. We have issues, there are issues that we've not addressed well. We haven't addressed our transportation system well. We haven't addressed our urban public school systems very well. There's a lot of things that we haven't done well. And we should do a better job of solving those problems. But I think for the most part, Boston's going to find itself in the right, place again. The thing we haven't talked about is, we talk about office space, but the thing that is really amazing right now is the life science business in Greater Boston has grown to be something that is the envy of the world. When we first started this business, back in the early 2000s or so, around 2000 or end of 1990s, there were maybe one or two companies, but the perception was that it wasn't really going to be an industry that would produce many jobs, that it was an industry that would be hyper focused on an area around MIT in Kendall Square. Now you look at it today, there's 40 million square feet of existing life science facilities from Kendall Square all the way out to Route 128 in Greater Boston. And these companies, many of them are household names, from Pfizer to all the big, drug companies. Many of the big drug companies closed up large campuses, research campuses that they had in New Jersey or Connecticut or whatever, and they've moved those people up to here. So that space is really doing very, very well. And if there's anything that we learned from COVID, these drug companies can really make a difference in people's lives, that's for sure. And so setting up space that is, appropriate scientifically for them, that is clean, that allows them to quickly manufacture these drugs, it's a huge opportunity for Boston, and we lead the world in that respect. So the next chapter on all this could be really interesting again.
And your project in East Boston has, as I recall, is geared toward a lot of space in that area, right?
Yeah. The interesting thing is what's happening now. It's the evolution of this business in the early 2000s. The lab space, which was really, lab oriented, was almost exclusively, as I said, focused around MIT. And in fact, if you didn't have anything in Kendall Square, you really didn't learn too much about the business because it wasn't going to go anywhere else. The big change in the last 5 or 10 years is that space has now expanded way past Kendall Square and is in places like Union Square, Somerville. It's certainly in the Seaport District in a big way. So if you think about the amount of lab space that's in the Seaport District, our site is just across the harbor by the Harbor Tunnel, just past the airport. So we're literally 2 minutes from the seaport by car. And what's happening with those companies is they're now beginning to produce drugs that need to be manufactured, particularly for manufactured trials. They want those drugs to be in highly specialized buildings because the manufacturing process is very technical and highly specialized. But they also want them to be in urban environments that can be populated by the kinds of young employees that they want to have who want to be in urban environments. And so rather than going out to Western Massachusetts or New York State, we think we can be a really good solution for those companies just 2 minutes from the seaport right at Suffolk Downs, which we're really excited about.
Well, I'm going to let you go because I've taken enough of your time, but one last very quick question. Walking around Boston these days, you said you're in at your office. It is strange, isn't it? If you want to go out and get something for lunch, a lot of places are closed now, and it's pretty empty. It's sort of a ghost town, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to walk over to the public market, which is open. Not all of it is open, but I'm putting a little plug for our friends at the public market. But it is open. It's strange. I think it kind of comes back to what we were saying earlier. As people, sort of have this rhetoric of, well, gee, is the office really going to be the same? Are people really going to return to the office? Think about our own feeling. We're all anxious to get back out there, see people again. Boston is such a small town. My favorite part about Boston is walking across town to go to a meeting and seeing friends and saying hello. Boston is almost like a college campus. Like you walk across to a meeting, you see people, you say hello, stop and get a cup of coffee, stop and have lunch with people. We're dying to get back to that, I think. And I think if this vaccine, my politics are pretty left of center. So I'm very happy that in 13 days, we'll have a new president. That president has pledged 1 million vaccines in people's arms per day till we get to 100 million vaccines in the first 100 days. I think he'll do it. Obviously things to date have not been, we've only had 4 million vaccines put in people's arms just in the last, 30 or 45 days, unfortunately. So we need to focus on this like it's a military operation. So if you project out and you get to the spring, the vaccines have begun to take hold, the weather gets warmer so people can be outside, I would suggest that there's going to be an explosion of people wanting to be outside, wanting to be at events, going to restaurants, going to music, it's going to be a really breathtaking opportunity to get back and re-engage with people. And I'm looking forward to it. And I know millions of people are as well.
Well, I think everybody is looking forward to it. Whether it will happen or not, I'm a little, I'm paid to be skeptical. So
I'm a glasses half full person.
Well, Tom O'Brien of the HYM Investment Group, thanks so much for joining us today. And to our listeners, we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Bruce.